Except
is.
in the military.
Oh, you do in the military
Oh, yeah.
too?
That's
Oh,
what
you
I
mean
did.
you can't do anything?
Yeah, well, that, and you don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
They tell you,
Yeah.
let's take your wisdom teeth for example, because it's on top.
Yeah, yeah,
You go in
yeah.
there because they tell you have to get your wisdom. You're like,
you
well, I
have
want
to-
my wisdom teeth.
Sorry,
Like,
your cancer dental.
you need to have your wisdom or you're not
You
going to
need
be
to
in
sign
the
it
Air Force.
for
You need to
You
sign
signed
it.
a piece of paper
You
once,
signed
20
it.
years ago.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, very good points. Let's try to squeeze in once more. Any other comments on this? It's a really good point of view.
I think he needs to stop going to mom, she forbid it.
I think you should go every time. In fact, I think that.
I think I'm gonna start sending her my normal homework. That's a lot of typing. She has people to do that for her. Nice, good idea.
Complain. Okay, so Mike Atkinson, since you're warmed up now, I think you do designers and programmers. I think it's time for them, since we've already accused them.
Okay, so designer and programmers, as he stated, were my stakeholders, and I was really surprised when I started researching this to find that there was one program, just one. I'll expand on that later, but there was only one program, and we've had the background on the Therac 25. It was actually a combination of Therac 6 and Therac 20, two previous units, and they started that in 1982 with Therac 25. And what happened, we kind of discussed with the doctor in the pages, between 1985 and 1987, six accidents happened, and 4 of those died, and 2 others left. So, in 1983, I would like to point out, and Yayo pointed out also, there were thousands, she said 18,000 patients, and there were no problems with the Therac 25. And so, for those 6 people, patients, it started in 1986, between 1986 and 1987, the unthinkable happened to them, they still died. The manufacturer,
Please go judgment, take time out of court. You want to see Mr. Blake?
it's up to you.
You might be at it for a little while, looks like they're going to so.
Yeah, they're gonna be there around. Mike, okay with you? You can't go pick up? Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry, I set that up.
We'll start up again.
Okay. Okay, let's try again, Mike.
You sure?
It's
I'm
gonna
gonna
start
sit
back
there,
up.
wait. All right.
I'm waiting for as soon as you sat down.
So, what was it? Therac 25 was a manufactured Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, AECL is which I will refer to in the future, built the machine from the Therac 6 and the Therac 20 in partnership with a French company. The 25, they had dissolved the friendship or partnership with the French company, and they hired a developer. They used the PDP-11 computer, which I had no idea what that was. But from 1970s to 1990s, the company Digital Equipment Corporation sold these computers, and they sold over 600,000 of them during that time.
Saturday, Sunday is something like
Saturdays, Saturdays. And by appointment, if you can't make Saturdays. I guess I'll give you the landscape one, your portrait.
This one's okay.
That was got 4 great talks out of 4 tries. Statistically, a first.
Yeah.
Let's go for 5 out of 5 then.
Very
Let's go
pressure
for 5
for
out of
me.
5. Awesome.
One. I don't think you're gonna win today.
I can speak loud if necessary.
I'll settle for a draw.
You speak loud. Soft spoken, you with a big stick.
Weren't you the guy that used to, in the old days, tell those guys to run the machines?
Yes, it's
Come up
true.
and comes around, doesn't it?
It's true.
Comes right back at you.
Nobody's around.
You're the guy that looked over and said, well, the lights are on, they're teaching, turn them on.
Teach them to get educated when we get at work.
Speaking of turn it on, Mike, you really know how to turn it on when you get in front of the room.
Yeah.
So what does that switch?
I told him I cheated. I used the NCOA outline for my paper. To,
That definitely is cheating, man.
I even wrote it down. It told me exactly. This is your introduction, dummy. Here's your transition. Here's your main point. You need to transition again to the second main point.
I want a copy of that, can I get it? Your pauses were really effective. Weren't they?
Speaking of pauses,
Well, we
shall
still,
we begin?
well, we got a latecomer. You know how irksome it is when you're ready to go and there's one chair empty?
Apologize, went in the wrong room, thought, where is everybody?
So, the latecomer has arrived, so we can proceed.
So due to the interruptions, I'll get straight to my point about the programmer. Almost everything I read and researched, and one researcher, which everything that you've probably read about this, or a lot of what you've read about this probably came from this one person, Nancy G. Levinson. She is the leading American expert in system and software safety. So a lot of studies and stuff that was written about this came from her books, from her articles, from her research, came from her. And in addition to that, you'll find many, many universities that have used this study in their program for academics. So, what I came upon in my research was, which was really surprising, that there was one programmer. And this one programmer, everything pointed to something being wrong with the software, something being wrong with the program. But we have this one programmer. Now, you'll be surprised to know that nobody knows who the programmer is. And why is that? The reason is he no longer worked for AECL at the time in 1986 when the lawsuits and the accidents happened. He was released. So my dilemma with that, should this programmer be known? Should he be held to some type of ethics? And in the beginning, my answer would have been yes. And then in my research, I ran across something that kind of changed my mind or made me lean the other way. But before I get in that, just some of the failures or some of the reasons that it points to the software, I'd like to read to you. And this is from Nancy Levinson's work also. It's important to note that while the software was the linchpin in the Therac 25, it wasn't the root cause. The entire system design was the real problem. Safety critical loads were placed upon a computer system that was not designed to control them. Timing analysis were not performed. Unit testing was never done. Fault trees for both hardware and software were not created. These tasks are not only responsible for the software engineers, or responsible of the software engineers, but the system engineers on the project. Therac 25 is long gone, but its legacy will live on. something that happens and points out the importance of software on life critical systems is not properly designed or adequately tested, you're gonna have problems. So, the programmer disappeared. The programmer left in 1986 in a lawsuit connected with the accidents. The lawyers were unable to obtain information about the programmer. His disposition was unknown. They attempted to make and obtain disposition of the programmer. The lawsuit was settled before it was accomplished. So they were unable to get anything about his background. But Nancy, Ms. Levison, she did find out something about him, and that he was not adequately trained for real-time systems. And basically, that was about all she could find out about him, but they never did give his name. So, there's my dilemma. Should we know the name of this programmer? And this article here changed my mind about whether or not I should know, or the public should know, who this person was. And as soon as I find it, where is it? Right here, right. The programmer left in 1986, lawsuit connected with one of the accidents. The lawyers were unable to obtain information about the programmer, and all attempt was made to obtain disposition for the programmer. The lawsuit was settled, and said that now this person, Alfred Fredman, he's a lead developer, and he made this point that made me change my mind about whether the program should be named. It's highly unfair and unethical for that person's name to be known beyond to perhaps potential employers and or lingering litigations, which they are 100% shielded from, and thus again not ethical. So, how would you like it? And this is what got me. How would you like it if you did your best job, you know how to do, you did it at the best of your ability, and you had available methods to you to do it the best, and then there was an accident? Are you responsible? If you had the best, you did your best? And the example that he gave, Mr. Fredman gave, was a good example of this, why this is a bad policy, is the person who designed the Tacoma Narrow Bridge also designed the Golden Gate, the vast majority of bridges to and from Manhattan, and many other well-known bridges projects. The real failing there was not their work, but a client that pushed for more and more cost savings in materials until the bridge simply did not have enough dead mass to resist harmonic motion. So the bridges were failing, but it wasn't due to the design or the designer's fault. It was because the manufacturer wanted to use cheaper materials. So in this case, and I bounce back and forth, because in this case, from what I've read, the programmer didn't have the education, he didn't have the experience, he didn't have the know-how for real-time programming. So it falls back on the company. Did they do their due diligence? When they purchased it from him, or they hired him to do this, they didn't do the due diligence in order to make sure that he knew what he was doing, and they were buying a significant product that they could put out to the public. So, I still say, and like I said, my dilemma was, should they know the programmer based on what Mr. Fredman said about the bridges? No, probably not. I don't think so. But it was due to AECL to do their due diligence and make sure they were buying and purchasing a product that they could give to the people and be safe.
First, I'd like to thank you for respecting the time limit.
My question would be, you're saying that, but do you believe the programmer had an ethical responsibility to inform his employers that he did not entirely know what he was doing?
Of course he did.
And did he so inform them?
Nothing was ever said about it.
Nothing was ever said.
Yeah. He was no longer working for him in 1986, so they didn't give his name up.
I know.
But
what I'm
they
saying is
took
before-
responsibility because they bought it, they owned it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, they hired him prior to that, so prior to that, they said, hey, this is what you want to do, should he have said,
They-
I can't do this correctly?
we don't know that he didn't know he couldn't do it correctly. But I
So it's
think-
all speculation.
Yeah.
I think the biggest issue though was, as we read, is that they didn't test them
Due
together.
diligence.
And they didn't test the machine with the software
Yeah.
before doing it.
Well,
They
and
just
one of the
threw it
lawsuits,
together and just-
one of the lawsuits, they were asked, okay, so was the machine tested? They said, yes, 2,700 hours. And then they came back and asked the same person that question, he says, oh, well, the 2,700 hours was in use, not prior to.
Beta testing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Practicing.
The problem with putting the responsibility on the programmer, saying that the programmer was ethically irresponsible for what he created, his program, is that this has a very specific failure mode. In the readings, the handouts and stuff, it says it only happened if a certain occurrence of sequence entries by the operator happened within 8 seconds.
Yeah.
That is something that normally you don't design a program thinking, okay, what if somebody puts this in 8 seconds? What if somebody puts this in 10 seconds? What if somebody puts it in? It's not something a programmer thinks about. It is something that you go through in your testing phase, in your testing process. So Mike and Paul, you got it right, that, you know, the important thing is that the testing didn't happen correctly.
It didn't happen correctly.
So there was no way to find this fault.
Yeah, and I had a very good instructor in the previous class to this one. He taught me about programming, and in programming, you do notes, you do comments. One of the things that was said in this software, in this program, there were no comments there. So that kind of led them to that they didn't have an experienced programmer because there were no comments. And there was an error code. He did put a program in there for error codes. The error code that you were just speaking about comes up code 54. But when they went to look for code 54, it wasn't.
What does this
nothing
mean?
there.
What does this mean?
Yeah, what does it mean?
Okay, I think you've done a terrific job about putting the programmer in perspective. And I've certainly come a long way than I was 5 minutes ago because of that. Unfortunately, you were tasked with both the designers and the programmers. So you've done an excellent job on the programmers. How about the designers? The people who designed the system that he programmed?
From what I read, what I researched, the design for the Therac 25 came from the 6 and the 20.
Not the software. The software is also designed.
Yeah, but I'm saying they borrowed what they knew about design-wise from those two.
Not
previous
software,
ones.
because they had no software.
Yeah, not software, I'm not saying software, but I'm saying the design came from those
The
two
hardware
previous-
design.
Yes.
But the hardware design is not the fault.
Right.
The software design.
Yes.
Now, this developer that exonerated the programmer, was he was the developer. What was his fault in this? Where did he fail?
The developer?
Yeah.
The same thing, they didn't do their due diligence.
He didn't do his due diligence in hiring.
In hiring the program.
That's speculation though.
Yeah. That's-
Right.
yeah.
And, so did he do his due diligence in testing the system?
No, he didn't, the system wasn't, like I said earlier, they said that they tested the system, but they tested it in use. They didn't test it prior to, they didn't test the software capability with
Right.
the 6 and the 20.
Right.
The 6 and the 20 didn't use a computer.
Right.
It had, self-interface locks, hardware that did it.
Absolutely right. I'm really impressed by this, presentation compared to your others because
First two,
you
yeah,
did a
I
lot of
am too.
research here.
All right, thank
And
you.
that shows, it's very rich talk because you did the research. Now, would you say that the software system was poorly designed?
Based on what I've read and researched, yes.
Now, as Mike knows and others do, the creation of a computer program comes in steps. First, the person who codes it or programs it is not the same person that designs it. So you have systems analysts and designers that design the flow of information through the pieces of hardware. And then you have the programmer that implements that design into code. And you can't make gold out of garbage. If the design is flawed, then no matter how good a programmer you are, it's going to be a flawed product because the design is flawed. Just like building a house. The architect gives you a lousy blueprint, no matter how good a carpenter you are, the house is going to not be a good house. So the design here is really, Levinson brings out very well that the design is more at fault than the programmer. And it's also the designer's responsibility to set up test procedures, which also weren't done. Now, all of that being said, the programmer did make an elementary blunder. He made an elementary programming blunder. And I can illustrate it to you on the whiteboard in a moment very simply. And it's a blunder that was not uncommon in those days, as I well know, because in the same years, 80 to 85, I was also making my money computer programming. So I felt the same constraints of limited memory, weak processors, that this, I used the same machine, DEF machine, digital machine, PDP in those days. And I know those limitations, and they're very severe limitations. So there were tricks that you pulled to work within that environment, and he was pulling these tricks. But these tricks also come at a price, and he paid the price by pulling a trick that he should not have pulled at a time. But it was standard practice to pull these tricks. And sure, it was a blunder for him to do that naive a thing at that time. However, every program I've written and every other program everyone else has written has similar blunders in it, because no one writes code perfectly. So he's not wrong to have a blunder in his code. It's wrong for the blunder not to be detected in test procedures. So I would shift the burden of the blame to the lack of testing. And if this situation occurs only once in 10 to the 10th times or something like that, it's very likely it would not have been caught in test anyway, because you can't test that many times. But at least it seems they should have attempted more tests than they did.
Livingston, in her research and investigation, she had access to everything, and Texas had 2 in a row accidents, 2 in a row in Tyler, Texas. She was able to recreate what went wrong with the program,
And
the
I will-
technician that was doing the test of the individual.
Right, and I'll recreate that on the screen for you in a moment as soon as it comes up. And also the lack of an error code manual is not the programmer's fault. He just produces the error code, and someone in the company has got to be a software documentation person that produces a trainer's manual or an operations manual. So again, that is not the programmer's fault, but it is the management fault not to produce that. But again, it was their first software project. They're coming from a hardware manual background. They hadn't done software before. So can you give them some slack? Can you give them some slack, guys? What?
The designers.
No, the whole
Oh,
company.
the whole company?
They're first.
I don't think the company as a whole.
How many say you have to give them some slack? Well, let's put it another way. Suppose it were just, they were producing candy vending machines. And they had the same failure rate. Does anyone get outraged?
Probably when I was in my candy.
Yeah, you would, but.
It happens with the AVs vending machines all the time.
I know.
Exactly right, and we don't become, and this is a classic case in every ethics class. Mike found hundreds, there are thousands out there that take this as their classic case, but I want to congratulate you guys, because in the last hour and a half, you have made me feel that this case has been overblown, especially Steph. When he cites these statistics and sees it from a doctor's point of view, these are negligible. These are negligible faults compared to the worth of the machine. Hey, it was right 18,000 times. Let's give the company some credit, agreed? It was right 18,000 times. So, I'm changing my viewpoint because of you guys, and well, you did it.
I have a permanent marker in my bag if you'd like to.
How about under the clock?
Stack overflow.
So do we know anything more about these personnels? He was the only programmer, sole programmer. That's not unusual, a small job like this. But you've got to be sure you hired the right guy. And looking at what he produced, I would say he was a pretty qualified programmer. I would say that they didn't select the wrong guy. Because so much of what he did was good, and the very tight constraints that were present in those days. And the one blunder, perhaps more, that he made is normal percentage blunders for programmers. He was not out of line. I don't think they hired wrong. What do you think, Mike? I think they
Well-
did not select the wrong guy. What do you think? Okay, let me show you what
Yeah,
happened.
I'm more, that they didn't do more due diligence on this guy. And not that that would've changed anything, but they could have done more.
Here I got a counter, okay? And what it's going to do, it's a counter that is in the, it's a counter that's in the software. It's not a click counter, it's just a space in memory that you can hold a number, okay? Now, if it holds the number 0, the machine is cleared to operate. So, as the machine warms itself up, each time it finds something wrong, it adds 1 to this counter. So this counter starts at 0 when the machine is off. So the machine turns on, and as the machine warms itself up and wakes itself up, if it detects an error in itself, it adds 1 to this counter. So now the machine knows it has an error someplace because the counter says 1. It continues to warm up, and the counter goes to a 2. And it continues to warm up, and it finds another error, and the counter goes to 3. Now, when it's totally warmed up, before it allows the machine to operate, it checks this error code. And if this error code is non-zero, it blocks the machine from turning on. Now, because memory was so small, and you had to make every available space, this counter is set that when 9 is reached, if you add 1 more to it, the 1 disappears because the space is too small and it goes back to 0. So it cycles. The maximum number that can be held in this counter is 9. If you try to add 1 more to it, then there's an overflow of 1, which falls off the counter and disappears, and the counter contains a 0. So it goes back to 1. Now, it's not really a base 10, but I think in his instance it was 256, which is a common number in programming. So if the machine found 255 errors, instead of shutting itself down because there was non-zero errors, the next error it found, it thought it was error-free and turned on, because the counter cycled back to 0, because the counter reached its maximum content. And I've done that more times than I'd like to say. So we all know it's an error that you should have your eyes open for. It's a counter overflow. And the solution to it is very simple. It's just having a counter that's this size, you have a counter that's bigger and can hold the maximum number of errors that the machine can produce. Or you have something else. It's like a simple yes-no flag. Instead of counting the errors, you back it up with a simple go, no-go. So it's a blunder. The programmer should have known better, probably did know better, and just didn't do it. That's
Like
a
you
common
said, it could be a
programming
memory,
What?
lack of memory in that time too.
No, he would not have done it
Adding the-
knowingly. He just
Yeah.
didn't think. He just didn't think hard enough. Maybe he's under time pressure or something. But I'm sure, based on what else he did, he knew about this, had the ability not to do it, and just did it anyway because there was too much else to think about or something. And so I don't fault the programmer, as this was his main, maybe only real blunder. And again, it's a very difficult thing to check in testing, because you have to accumulate 255 errors before the fault occurs, which is a hard number of errors to accumulate. So it's a rare occurrence. So it's starting to look more and more like the company was less and less at fault. So thank you, Mike, for opening my eyes even further. Let's continue with the next one. So John, you would come in very strongly here to defend the administration of the company. But you didn't have sufficient notice for me to prepare. Is there anyone who would like to wing it ad hoc to defend or castigate, is that a word, castigate?
It is a
The
word.
company administration.
Well, I think mine kinda leads in with investigators. Since we
Investigators?
already- yeah,
Yes, you
since
would,
we-
because you investigated them. Good,
And
go.
we introduced, Nancy Levison, so.
Okay, so now, Paul, is going to talk about the people who were tasked with investigating this. Gonna identify who they were, because I don't know who they were, whether they were governments, doctors, some commission board or something like that. And then hopefully report their findings and make ethical judgments, something like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so he can cover the company administration aspect of it too.
So basically, just with like any trial or any legal issue that goes on prior to the investigation happening, it's always the media that's reporting, you know, biased opinions on what was happening with these issues. So that's what brings me to my stakeholders. We have Nancy Levison from the University of Washington and Clark Turner from the University of California. They're the two investigators that were put into doing this. Now,
Are you interruptible, or you prefer to talk and then we talk about your?
oh, we can, it's fine.
Who put them in, their position? Who formed this board of inquiry? What's their authority?
I'm sorry,
Or
I
are they
didn't
just doing it on their own?
find that, yeah. Sorry, I got mixed up now, but,
I'm sorry. I should-
That's okay.
That's why I asked.
okay. So, they're, as stakeholders, the investigators aren't really, per se, held ethically to the issues, but more or less, they have to be the unbiased finger pointers, if you will, of who is ethically responsible for what happened. And now through my research, a lot of it is just the investigation itself, what happened, and we all already know what happened through that. But I'd like to read some of this here that I found in an investigation of the Therac 25 accidents. And this just explains how they took their unbiased point of view on these, and while remaining unbiased and trying to figure out who is ethically responsible for these. So, it says here, with information for this article taken from publicly available documents, we present a detailed accident investigation of the factors involved in the overdoses and attempts by the users, manufacturers, and the US and Canadian governments to deal with them. Our goal is to help others learn from this experience, not to criticize the equipment's manufacturer or anyone else. The mistakes that were made are not unique to this manufacturer, but are, unfortunately, fairly common in other safety critical systems. Let me point out too, that Frank Houston of the USDA, or US Food and Drug Administration, FDA, a significant amount of software for life critical systems comes from small firms, especially in the medical device industry. Firms that fit the profile of those resistant to or uninformed of the principles of either system safety or software engineering. Furthermore, these problems are not limited to the medical industry. It is still a common belief that any good engineer can build software, regardless of whether he or she is trained in state-of-the-art software engineering procedures. Many companies building safety-critical software are not using proper procedures from a software engineer and safety engineering perspective. Most accidents are system accidents. That is, they stem from complex interactions between various components and activities. To attribute a single cause to an accident is usually a serious mistake. And in this article, we hope to just demonstrate complex nature of the accidents and the need to investigate all aspects of system development and operations to understand what has happened and to prevent future accidents.
Excellent. Great
So,
attitude.
yeah, they weren't anywhere in the ethical spectrum, but like I said, more or less the finger pointer unbiasedly to figure out who it was, so,
I like that very much.
yeah.
Yeah, it's very astute. So that's another thing that I'm learning from you guys, and that is that this was a new field, software for medical machines. A new field, especially at that time, and people just weren't cognizant of the extra safety that you had to do. They just regarded it as another programming, like a vending machine,
Right.
but it was much more serious. And so that's also, the other thing I'm really learning is it wasn't that big a deal. 6 out of 18,000. I mean, it's been overblown, and I went along with it because it's such a great ethical issue, agreed? But 6 out of 18,000, machine was doing something right.
Right.
Anything more from the investigators?
That's really all that I can find. Most of the stuff that I could find is just about the investigation itself. So I chose to focus just on their unbiased point.
I like
of
that.
view.
Now, was there not an official Canadian Board of Inquiry from the Canadian government? Did anything like that
Well,
happen?
it just said that they used U.S. and government agencies.
Yeah. From my
informations.
research, I thought it was actually pushed more from the FDA here in the States.
In the
'Cause that's
States?
where the accidents occurred. It
What
was
did the
licensed
FBI
in the States.
do?
FDA.
What did the FDA do?
It's going too far, you're taking all my notes.
All right, I guess we'll get to that.
We'll talk about that, I got nothing to talk about. They killed me.
Well, what a good lead-in. Let's transition.
Okay, yeah, true. So, there wasn't an independent investigatory, like the US points out, or sets up these, before they have an impeachment, they have a special prosecutor or something.
Well, I think that's just Congress that likes the special prosecutor.
Oh, okay, so that didn't happen, but I think the Canadian government did, intervene a little bit, or at least at one point. I might have, thought of that, okay?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so that's a very good point of view that you, hit the nail on the head with the investigators. Wasn't that much there, huh?
Yeah, like I said, it's a lot of just about the investigation, which is pretty much stuff we already
So
knew
they were
about what happened.
self-appointed, they were a self-appointed
That's
committee of
correct,
two to investigate it
Mhm.
in an unbiased fashion.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mike, you gotta be next then, because you're coming in right behind him, so tell us what you got, please. He's got judicial and governmental, parts.
So, like you said, that's my parts, the judicial system and government parts. Now,
If you could use your upfront voice, I would.
So, the judicial system had a very small role in this aspect, so I will talk about them last. As far as government agency, the main government agencies that were involved in this was the Federal Drug Administration and the Canadian Radiation Protection Board, who were notified of a patient being overdosed in July of '85. They were notified. Now, to get into the machine, how the FDA works and how it got approved in the States, they used what was called pre-market equivalence. And basically what this was, if something similar had already been approved, then they wasn't required to go through the entire testing phase and approval rating. They'd look at it, if it matched up similar to the previous product, then it pretty much just got pushed on through with no real investigation into this product. Which at that time, 94% of all medical equipment came through this process. And the Therac 25 was the same way. Now, like I said, in '85, they were notified. In April '86, the FDA was notified again and instructed AECL to contact all sites and told them to investigate the problem and submit a corrective actions plan. In May of '86, the FDA was unsatisfied and ordered AECL to re-notify all sites with more specific information about the defect and hazards associated. Now, over the next 6 months, exchanges between the FDA and the AECL occurred before AECL submitted a revised correction plan. And during this time frame, more injuries happened. In February of '87, FDA and the Canadian counterparts required all units to be shut down until an effective and permanent modifications were made. Alright, so that's pretty much what I got up to before they got in. So the one thing that you need to understand, the ethical standpoint from the FDA is based off everything I researched, they did everything they were instructed, they did nothing ethically wrong. Users were not required to report injuries to any government office at this time when this occurred. 99% of all injuries were not reported to the FDA. So only 1% of the time. In fact, the first incident where someone was injured was not reported to them by doctors or the medical profession. It was reported by AECL themselves, who told both parties involved, and we would notify of an accident that happened. It's also known that the FDA did not have the power to recall at this time an incident. It wasn't until 1990 that a law was passed that required all healthcare facilities to report the incidents to the manufacturer and the FDA. So it wasn't even a law until 5 years later that they had to even report the manufacturer or the issues to manufacturers and the FDA. So based off of this, now, because of the constraints the FDA had at the time, all they could do was advise the company. They couldn't mandate the company to do anything. So finally it got to the point they had to wait on this corrective action. They submitted, they're like, no, I don't like it. They submitted, no, I don't like it. They submitted, no, I don't like it. It didn't go for 6 straight months where they submitted one every month, but it skipped like 1 month. I want to say July, I'd have to go back and look, so I don't want to assume. But it was 1 month that it skipped. And that entire instance of those 6 months went on this corrective action plan. And while the corrective action plan is in place, the machine is still being used. So, I know we started saying that with the statistics, 6 out of 18,000 is kind of insignificant. But based off the research and that with the advisement of the FDA, the manufacturers probably should have ethically known to inform the medical facilities that, hey, we have a problem, we don't know what it is, because they did not know what it is, and advise them at that time against using the instrument. I think they had an ethical responsibility. So to say that the company was free of fault, I would say is no, because without them knowing what the errors were and what was causing the problem at the time, I think they were ethically responsible under the risk aversion, not or to inform the users of the issues and to recommend shutting them off based off of this.
Awesome bit of research, organization, and summary. If the FDI had known in 1985 that they were going to look at a 6 out of 18,000 injury rate, would they have approved it on those statistics? Do they approve that kind?
I think they still would have.
Okay, now, this magnification is important, that only 1% are reported. That means that it goes up by a factor of 100. Instead of 6 injuries, his estimation is now we have 600 injuries. And 600 out of 18,000 is not insignificant. He's saying only 1% were reported.
What's 18,000 divided by 600?
Too big. 3%. Or more. 30%.
Or 18,000 two is 180 is
3% or
3%?
3%?
right.
Okay, would you take a medication with 3% harm rate?
We do all the time.
Well, one. Well, one. I don't.
3% fatality rate? Well, it's not a 3% fatality rate.
No.
Failure.
Failure rate.
Failure. Not
If
failure, harm rate.
Think about
Harm rate.
think
Harm
about
rate.
the list of side effects that come with
Well, those are
medications.
side effects, we're talking about, it's unannounced side effects. Unannounced side, I mean, I refuse operations with a 3% fatality rate. I don't know what anyone else does, I won't get into me,
Yeah, yeah.
opinions at the door, but, I think 3% is
But
a lot higher than .03.
I think what he was talking about is 99% of all incidents weren't reported.
And
Not
injuries.
specifically this case.
No, I just said overall at that time, 9% of all injuries were not.
Injuries, he
reported.
said injuries, not incidents.
All injuries though.
Yes.
So, do we take that as 99, just like we said, is this actually 600 people
Yes.
that got
Well,
overdosed?
no, it's a speculative figure, it's a
So-
ballpark figure, it's off the table, but, it raises the question of unreported incidences, and we all know there are many more unreported than reported. So I'm withdrawing my support of this statistical insignificance based on what Mike.
I think it would be very hard to miss these in a reporting sense.
When we get to the
Because-
hospital administrators, we'll find out just
Yeah.
how easy it was.
Yeah.
So, did you say, that the FDA, since the Therac 25 was new, and there was two previous to that, the 6 and the 20, that the scrutiny of accepting or getting it approved wasn't as stringent as it would be. So, I see that as an issue that's tied to technology, and we're doing that now, we did the last class, is technology is growing faster than laws can keep up, laws and regulations can keep up with it. Because that was the introduction of software to two machines that didn't have software, so it should have actually probably been scrutinized more, because it was new, as he was saying, it was taking over the interlock safety procedures, the interfaces. The computer was now doing it, whereas before it was hardware and the technician was doing it. So,
I get what you're saying.
yeah.
But
So-
they're saying at that time.
Yeah, at that time, you know what I'm
because
saying,
it was so
technology
similar.
is moving,
Right.
Yeah.
and
But
that's so
in their
similar.
eyes, the only difference was that little computer
Yeah,
program,
the little
everything else
computer,
was pretty
yeah,
much
the
the
little
same
computer
as
that
in the
took
hardware.
over all those
So,
safety things.
when it was presented, they would present with,
Yeah.
hey, this is the only change.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
smaller
yeah.
thing and this small thing, and they were like, and they did look at it, they
Yeah.
just didn't go down and dissect it and
Yeah.
take a 10-year
Yeah.
plan on it.
And probably didn't know what questions to
And
ask.
you ask,
either.
because technology is moving
Right.
faster than
Right.
regulations.
There's
Yeah.
another factor he
Just a
pointed
new
out, the
model.
law came in 5 years later,
Yeah.
and our author tells us many times that the laws are always late. And the laws are always late. So, but they do come in, and they're coming in as solutions to all these technologically ethical problems that we have, but they're coming in after the fact, because you can't pass a law for a problem you don't know about.
What? We ain't got clairvoyant shit in this day and age?
Mine's,
A little rusty?
No,
Well, I know you're
it's-
around during
you
alchemy
get
and
it,
all
you
that
get it in there.
mysticism. And I heard you and
shielded, I don't
Nostradamus
wanna
was
freak, I
buddies.
downplay
You
it, I
get
don't
in your
wanna freak
genes
people
later.
out.
Right?
DNA.
Cas9.
Now, that was very good, and it swung me back one more time. I know that 99% is a make-up number, but it does raise the issue of unreported injuries, which we'll get at. But in the interim, I did think of another example for this rollover that you're all very familiar with. What happens to your car odometer when it reaches 99,999,000 miles?
It dies.
No, it goes back to
Oh,
zero,
so-
right?
yeah.
So if you go to a used car lot and you have one sitting on zero, does it mean it's a new car? So that's what this, exactly what happens here. The error count's sitting on zero, it thinks that it's a new car, it thinks it's error-free because it rolled over.
I want a car that can go that far and last that long.
I'll sell you one. Okay, speaking of hospital administrators, we're ready for them, and that's David. We've got you on the hot seat right now.
So the hospital administrators are
A
those
little louder for this guy up front, please.
who manage a single hospital or a number of hospitals. They oversee various aspects of
A
the
little
hospital
slower for my slow ear, please.
operation.
No, one thing, when you read, I was very admirable because, Mike was reading, but you didn't know he was reading, because he was speaking. He had that eye contact, he was aware of his audience, so he wasn't just into his paper, he was into his audience. So he was reading and speaking. You're reading and reading. So let's have the speaking, please. Hi.
In regards to Therac 25, the hospitals in general had never seen such overdoses and were unsure of the cause.
Right.
Hospitals were assured by the manufacturer that it could not have been a malfunction of the machine itself. However, the manufacturer did make changes to the turntable in effort to improve the safety of the machine after the second incident. Yet, even though they improved certain features, they were still unsure of the actual cause of the accidents concerning the patients. According to in light of the second overdose in Yakima Valley in 1987, it led the hospital staff to suspect that the first incident was also an overdose. Further investigation showed signs of tissue damage in the first patient, which was repaired surgically, and the patient survived. Staff concluded that the first overdose may have been less severe than the second, since damage only developed sometime after the exposure. In a report written after the second overdose, one of the medical physicists said, "At that time, we did not believe that the patient was overdosed because the manufacturer had installed additional hardware and software safety devices to the accelerator." In a letter from the manufacturer dated September 16, 1985, it is stated that analysis of the hazard rate resulting from these modifications indicates an improvement of at least 5 orders of magnitude. With such an improvement in safety, 10 million %. We do not believe that there could have been any accelerator malfunction. These modifications to the accelerator were completed in September of '85. So AECL and the hospital administrators were also unsure as to the root cause and decided to continue using the machine. Why would they continue using the machine? If they stopped treatment for their patients by using the Therac 25, it would definitely cut into their operation and livelihood as a hospital. And since nobody was really certain if the machine was a problem or if it was a patient issue or whatnot, they had to continue using the machine. Without it, patients in need of treatment would be deprived as well, as the hospital would essentially lose profit without offering this treatment to its patients. What could the hospitals have done to improve the situation? Make the environment safe for the patient, such as in the Yakima incident, the video camera surveilling the patient was broken, and the operators had no idea that the patient was being injured, in which if they would have been able to monitor the patient, they could have seen that they were trying to run for the door and maybe provide some kind of assistance or stop the machine. They could have ensured maintenance checks were being completed properly by staff, and not to allow the machine's operation if certain safety features were not operational, such as the intercom. They should have treated any issue with major concern and properly notified the manufacturer and the FDA.
Excellent. Class? That was the guy we were all set to blame, but David's put up a pretty good defense.
I see that the hospitals have a double whammy there. They're looking out for not only the goods of, patients that require this treatment, but they also have to keep their doors open, and through these treatments is one of the way they fund keeping the doors
So
open.
some of these hospitals, it could be strictly cancer patient based, or they could be like a
Yeah, the place in Georgia, its name was the oncology something, so it's probably straight cancer based.
And they always wanna strive for the highest or newest technology too, so.
Any more points to David's?
Did they fire any of the operators, like the one that left the patient alone and went to an office party?
They don't say.
That was my research, I didn't research further.
Did the hospital say anything about the specter that Mike rose about unreported injuries? I mean, that's their item, isn't it? Anything about the hospital administration not reporting injuries or minimizing or complicity or something?
I can help it. They don't keep track of the information that happens.
They don't keep track.
No.
Is that a failure? Should they be keeping track?
Yes, yes, yes.
Should they have been at that time keeping